I was torturing my bestie's ex in The Sims when a SWAT team raided my home. The battering ram hit my bedroom door so hard my monitor shook. My hands shot up instinctively, mouse clattering to the floor. They yanked me from my chair, slamming me face first into my desk while someone zip-tied my wrists behind my back. My mom's screams from downstairs cut through everything. Dad's deeper voice trying to demand explanations. The lead detective looked at my parents being escorted in by 2 officers, both of them pale and shaking, then turned to me. Bastion Ding has been missing for 48 hours. Her voice was flat, professional. You're our prime suspect. My coochie almost dropped through the floor. I hadn't even known my bestie's ex was missing. The detective pulled out her phone, swiping to something that made my mom gasp when she saw it. We have your text messages. She turned the screen toward my parents. Your daughter has been planning this. I tried to speak, but my throat was sand. She started reading my texts out loud, each word hanging in the air like an accusation. Just trapped him in a room with no doors. Her voice was ice. Watching him pee himself and cry, laughing my butt off. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Dad's face drained of color. That's from The Sims. I finally managed to choke out, but the detective kept reading. Setting the kitchen on fire next. Deleted all the smoke alarms so he can't escape. She looked up at me. Sent 2 days before Bastion disappeared. She's never even hurt anyone, Dad said, voice shaking. This has to be some mistake. That's what the parents always say, the detective replied coldly. She scrolled to more texts. Look at this one. Brought him to an isolated location and made him wet himself over and over. Won't let him use the bathroom. Time-stamped yesterday afternoon. The Sims has bladder mechanics. I screamed, but no one was listening. My best friend Daisy had been devastated after Bastion cheated on her. Making him in The Sims, torturing the digital version. It was stupid, but it made her laugh. Except now those messages, stripped of any context, they sounded like the real thing. My friend loves watching him suffer. She emphasized each word like it was poison. Sent that yesterday. Right before. Already removed all the ladders from the pool. No way out this time. They were bagging my computer now, my phone, everything. Another officer was photographing my desk where I'd doodled death scenarios for the sim. Each one labeled Bastion dies with little hearts around it because Daisy thought it was hilarious. Mom was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her face. Dad kept looking at me like he was trying to figure out who I really was. What's The Sims? Mom asked through tears. Is it some kind of dark web thing? It's a life simulation game. I sobbed. Millions of people play it. The detective scrolled further. Your friend even asked you to stop. Daisy wrote, okay, this is getting creepy. Maybe we should stop. And you replied, no way, I'm just getting started. He deserves worse. She looked up at me. She begged you to let it go. Seriously, enough with the Bastion stuff. But you insisted, not until I've tried every single death. Stop being weak. You were obsessed. It's a freaking game! I shouted, voice cracking. Check my computer. The Sims is right there. I made a character that looks like him and we're aware of how perpetrators sometimes rehearse crimes through gaming. She cut me off. Virtual practice before real execution. We've seen it before. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe. They thought I'd practiced. That I'd kidnapped Bastion after torturing his digital version. The room was spinning. Officers were tearing through everything. Each item they bagged another piece of evidence against me. The detective's phone buzzed. She answered, listening intently. Her expression shifted slightly. She walked to my computer, still running. The Sims neighborhood cheerfully playing its music. She leaned in closer, seeing Bastion's name above the dead Sim floating in my pool. The gallery beside it showing save after save. Bastion burns. Bastion starves. Bastion gets eaten by cowplant. She clicked on my messages with Daisy, the full thread. Daisy begging me to make him suffer in the game. Me sending screenshots of each death. The detective straightened up slowly. She looked at her team, gave a short nod. The officer behind me cut my zip ties. They left without apology. Mom hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. That's when Dad revealed where Bastion really was. Dad's voice cracked when he spoke. He said Bastion wasn't missing at all, that he'd been staying at the men's shelter on 5th Street downtown for the past 2 weeks after his parents kicked him out. My brain couldn't process the words. I was still shaking from the zip ties, from the SWAT boots on my bedroom floor, from seeing my parents' faces when they thought I'd kidnapped someone. Dad kept talking, explaining he volunteers at the shelter every Saturday and Sunday morning, serving breakfast and helping with intake paperwork. He'd seen Bastion there 3 days ago, recognized him immediately from all the Instagram photos Daisy had shown our family over the months they dated. Dad said Bastion looked rough, wearing the same hoodie in every shift, but he seemed okay, playing chess with the other guys and keeping to himself. Dad never mentioned it because he didn't know about any missing person report, didn't realize Bastion's parents had filed one or that police were looking for him. Mom's crying got louder, harder, and she turned on Dad with this look I'd never seen before. She asked how he could not mention seeing Daisy's ex-boyfriend at a homeless shelter, how that wasn't worth bringing up at dinner or in casual conversation. Dad's face went red and he stammered that he thought Bastion was just volunteering too, or maybe visiting someone, and it felt weird to gossip about some kid's personal business. Mom shouted that our daughter just got raided by SWAT because of information he had, that he could have prevented this whole nightmare with one sentence. The tension in our house shifted so fast it gave me whiplash. From terror about my arrest to confusion about the timing, to anger at Dad for not connecting the dots sooner. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table where the officers had left it after checking it. My hands shook so bad I could barely unlock the screen. I pulled up Daisy's contact and hit call, pressing the phone to my ear while Mom and Dad argued behind me. Daisy answered on the second ring asking if I was okay, if the police thing was real, because someone's cousin posted about SWAT trucks on our street. I cut her off and told her Bastion wasn't missing, that he was at a shelter downtown, that my dad had seen him there. Silence on the other end for like 10 seconds. Then Daisy said that was impossible, that Bastion's parents would never kick him out. They worship their golden boy. They think he's perfect. But I could hear doubt creeping into her voice, that little shake that meant she was questioning what she thought she knew. She asked why he'd be at a shelter, and I said I didn't know yet. But Dad saw him there 3 days ago, and he's been there at least 2 weeks. Daisy went quiet again, and then whispered that Bastion's mom had posted on Facebook about praying for their lost son, acting like he'd been taken from them. I spotted the detective's card sitting on our coffee table, bent and slightly torn from where someone had set it down. I knew I needed to call her back with this information, needed to tell her where Bastion actually was. I tried to pick up the card, but my hands were shaking so badly it slipped through my fingers twice. Mom saw me struggling and took the phone from Daisy, telling her we'd call back, then helped me hold the detective's card steady while she dialed the number for me. The detective answered with her last name, flat and professional, probably expecting another case call. Dad took the phone and explained who he was, that he volunteers at the 5th Street shelter, that he'd seen the missing person there multiple times over the past 2 weeks. I could hear the detective's voice change through the speaker, getting sharper, more focused. She asked Dad specific questions about when he'd last seen Bastion, what condition he was in, whether he'd spoken to him. Dad answered each one carefully while Mom and I sat frozen on the couch. The detective said she'd be there within the hour and hung up. We waited in this awful silence, nobody knowing what to say, Dad looking guilty and Mom looking angry and me just trying to stop shaking. 53 minutes later, headlights swept across our living room window. The detective's sedan pulled into our driveway. Just her this time. No SWAT team, no other officers. She looked exhausted when she came to the door, like this case had just gotten way more complicated than she wanted. She sat at our kitchen table with Dad and took his statement, writing everything in a small notebook, asking him to describe Bastion's appearance and behavior at the shelter. Dad said Bastion seemed quiet, withdrawn, always sitting in the back corner of the common room. The detective asked if Dad had spoken to him, and Dad said no. He didn't want to intrude, just recognized him and figured he had his reasons for being there. The detective closed her notebook and looked at all of us, then said we were coming with her to the shelter to locate Bastion and confirm his identity. We piled into her car, Mom in front, Dad and me in back, and she drove us through town toward 5th Street. The whole ride felt surreal after the morning's chaos, like we'd entered some alternate timeline where I was helping find someone instead of being accused of hurting them. The detective's radio crackled with other calls, but she ignored them, focused on the road. The shelter was a brick building that used to be a church, with high windows and a cross still visible above the door. We parked in the small lot, and the detective told us to wait in the lobby while she checked if Bastion was there. But Dad said he could show her where the common room was, and she agreed, so we all followed him through the double doors. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and coffee. Dad led us down a hallway to a large room with folding tables and mismatched chairs. Bastion was there in the corner playing cards with 2 other guys, both older than him, both looking like they'd been at the shelter a while. He looked so much thinner than in Daisy's Instagram photos, his cheekbones sharp and his eyes sunken with dark circles underneath. He was wearing a faded gray hoodie and jeans that looked too big on him now. When he glanced up and saw us, saw the detective's badge clipped to her belt, his face went completely white. The cards fell from his hands and scattered across the table. The detective walked over and asked if he was Bastion Ding, and he nodded, not making eye contact with any of us. She asked him to come with her to a private room, and he stood up slowly, like his legs might not hold him. They disappeared into a small office off the common room, and the detective closed the door. Dad, Mom, and I stood in the hallway outside, not talking, just waiting. Through the door, I could hear Bastion crying, his voice breaking as he said he never meant for any of this to happen, that he just needed to disappear for a while, that he didn't know what else to do. The detective's voice was quieter, harder to make out, asking questions I couldn't hear. Then Bastion's voice got louder, and he was explaining that his parents found out he's gay 2 weeks ago, that they went through his phone and found messages with a guy from his English class. He said they screamed at him for hours, called him disgusting, told him he was going to hell. His dad gave him 30 minutes to pack whatever he could carry, and then drove him to this shelter and left him there. Bastion said he'd been too ashamed to tell anyone, couldn't face his friends or Daisy or anyone from his old life. He just grabbed his backpack with some clothes and his wallet and ended up here, ignoring all the calls and messages because he couldn't deal with explaining why his parents hated him now. His phone died after the first day, and he never bothered charging it because he didn't want to see his parents' hateful messages or have to lie to his friends about where he was. The detective's voice got quieter after that, and I couldn't make out her next questions. Bastian answered in broken sentences between sobs, his voice muffled through the door. We stood there for what felt like forever, my legs going numb from standing still so long. Mom kept shifting her weight from foot to foot, and Dad stared at the floor with his arms crossed. Finally, the door opened and the detective stepped out, her expression unreadable. She asked Bastian if he knew anyone by my name, and he shook his head, looking confused. She pulled out her phone and showed him screenshots of my texts to Daisy, the ones about trapping him and watching him suffer. His face scrunched up as he read them, and he looked up at her with total confusion in his eyes, asking why someone would write that about him. The detective explained about The Sims, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to something like disbelief. He said he'd never even played that game, didn't understand why anyone would make a character of him to torture. The detective thanked him for his time and told him he wasn't in any trouble, that this was just a big misunderstanding. We all walked back through the shelter lobby in silence and out to the parking lot where her car was parked. The sun was too bright after being inside, and I had to squint against it. The detective turned to my parents and said she was sorry for the distress this morning caused our family. Her voice was flat, professional, like she was reading from a script. She explained that the text messages looked extremely suspicious without context, and they had to investigate thoroughly when someone was reported missing. Dad asked if we were free to go, and she nodded, handing him a card with a case number on it. Mom didn't say anything, just grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard my fingers went numb. We drove home in Dad's car, nobody talking, the radio off, just the sound of tires on pavement. When we pulled into our driveway, I could see the front door was still open from when the SWAT team burst through it hours ago. Inside, the house looked like a tornado hit it. Couch cushions thrown everywhere, kitchen drawers pulled out and dumped, family photos knocked off the walls. I walked upstairs to my room and pushed open what was left of my door. The battering ram had split the wood right down the middle, and it hung crooked on its hinges. My desk drawers were all pulled out, contents scattered across the floor. My closet door stood open with all my clothes yanked off hangers and piled on the ground. My bed was stripped, mattress pulled half off the frame, pillows sliced open with stuffing spilling out. They'd even gone through my trash, dumping it out and spreading garbage across my carpet. My computer was gone, obviously taken as evidence. My phone too. My gaming setup completely dismantled. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the mess and just stared at the wall where my monitor used to be. This was my space, my private room, and strangers had torn through every inch of it looking for evidence that I'd hurt someone. I started picking up clothes mechanically, refolding them even though my hands were shaking. Mom appeared in the doorway and said to leave it, that we'd clean tomorrow, but I couldn't stop. I needed to put something back together. I was still folding when I heard a car pull up outside and then frantic knocking on our front door. Mom went downstairs and I heard Daisy's voice, high and panicked, asking if I was okay. Her footsteps pounded up the stairs and then she was in my doorway. Mascara streaked down her face, eyes red and swollen. She rushed over and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, saying she was sorry over and over. She said she saw the SWAT team at my house this morning from down the street, that she tried to call but my phone went straight to voicemail, that she's been freaking out all day. I told her they thought I actually kidnapped Bastian because of our Sims texts. Her face went completely white and she sat down hard on my stripped mattress. She said this was all her fault, that she was the one who wanted revenge, who kept asking me to make him suffer in the game. I explained that Bastian was fine, that he'd been at a homeless shelter this whole time, and then I told her why. I said his parents kicked him out for being gay. Daisy went completely silent, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't find words. After a long pause, she admitted she'd always wondered about him, that there were signs she'd noticed but ignored. She said he was so aggressive about acting straight, making comments about girls, being super physical in public with her, that she convinced herself she was wrong about her suspicions. She started crying again, harder this time, her whole body shaking. She said she felt horrible about the Sims' revenge now, knowing what Bastian was actually going through while we were joking about killing his digital version. The cheating that had seemed so important 2 weeks ago suddenly felt small compared to him being rejected by his own parents and living in a shelter. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there next to her while she cried. Mom came upstairs with 2 mugs of tea and sat down on the floor with us, asking us to explain The Sims to her. Daisy and I tried to describe how it's just a life simulation game, how millions of people play it, how making characters suffer in funny ways is just dark humor that helps you cope with real feelings. But hearing ourselves explain it out loud made it sound weak and stupid. Mom asked why we thought torturing a fake person was funny, and neither of us had a good answer. She wasn't mad, just trying to understand, but that somehow made it worse. We sat there drinking tea and trying to explain gaming culture to my mom until the sun started going down outside my broken window. Daisy left around 8 and I tried to go to bed even though my room was still a disaster. I lay there in the dark with my eyes closed, but every time I started to drift off, I saw the SWAT team bursting through my door again. The sound of the battering ram hitting wood, my face being slammed into my desk, the zip ties cutting into my wrists. My chest got tight and my breathing went fast and shallow. I gave up trying to sleep around midnight and ended up sitting in my closet with the light on, knees pulled up to my chest, just trying to breathe normally. I stayed there until the sun came up and light started filtering through my broken door. I had to go to campus for my morning class even though I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The moment I walked across the quad, I could feel people staring. Groups of students would go quiet when I passed, then start whispering as soon as I was a few feet away. In the student center, someone pointed their phone at me and I realized they were filming. My stomach dropped when I checked social media on a library computer and saw the video. Someone across the street from my house had recorded the whole SWAT raid from their window. The battering ram. The officers dragging me out in zip ties. My mom screaming. It had been posted 6 hours ago and already had thousands of views. The comments were full of people speculating about what I did, calling me a psycho, saying I looked guilty, making jokes about my pajamas. Someone had screenshotted my social media profiles and posted them with the video. My face was everywhere, attached to a crime I didn't commit, and there was nothing I could do to stop it from spreading. My email dinged with a message from my academic advisor, Maya, asking me to come to her office as soon as possible. I grabbed my backpack and walked across campus with my hood up, trying to make myself invisible. Every person I passed felt like they were staring at me even when they probably weren't. Maya's office was in the administrative building on the 3rd floor. I knocked on her door and she opened it immediately, her face soft with concern. She gestured to the chair across from her desk and closed the door behind me. Maya pulled up the video on her computer and I had to look away because seeing myself dragged out in zip ties made my chest tight all over again. She asked if I was okay and whether I needed to take time off from the school to deal with everything. I shook my head because missing classes would just make everything worse and I'd fall behind. Maya listened while I explained the whole thing, talking too fast, my words tripping over each other. I told her about The Sims and how it's just a game where you make little people and control their lives. I explained about Daisy's breakup and how we were just joking around making Bastion's character suffer in stupid ways. I showed her screenshots on my phone of what The Sims actually looks like, the cartoony graphics and the silly deaths. Maya nodded and said she believed me, but her expression stayed serious. She warned me that facts don't matter to most people once they've decided someone is guilty of something. She said I should prepare for ongoing problems on campus because the court of public opinion doesn't care about evidence or truth. The way she said it made my stomach hurt because I knew she was right. My afternoon class was Introduction to Psychology, and I almost skipped it, but I couldn't afford to miss any more school. I sat in the back row like always and pulled out my notebook. 2 girls in front of me were whispering and I heard my name. One of them said I was definitely a psycho who got away with something. The other one said the police wouldn't have raided someone's house for no reason. I stared at my blank notebook page and tried to pretend I couldn't hear them. The professor started talking about cognitive dissonance, but I couldn't focus on anything he was saying. The girls kept whispering and glancing back at me. Finally, the professor stopped mid-sentence and asked if everything was okay. The whole class turned to look at where he was staring, right at me and the 2 whispering girls. One of them went red and shook her head. The professor said we should all focus on the lecture and respect our classmates. It just made everything 10 times worse because now everyone definitely knew something was going on with me. I wanted to sink through the floor. My phone buzzed in my pocket during class. Then it buzzed again. And again. I pulled it out under my desk and saw texts from Daisy coming in rapid fire. She was typing in all caps about how Bastion's parents were telling everyone the whole thing was a misunderstanding. They were claiming they never kicked him out at all. They said Bastion was mentally unstable and ran away on his own and they'd been worried sick about him. Daisy sent a screenshot of a Facebook post from Bastion's mom talking about her poor troubled son. Daisy was furious at them for lying when everyone knew the truth about what they did. She said they were trying to save face and make themselves look like victims. I typed back that parents like that always rewrite history to make themselves look better. My phone kept buzzing with more messages from Daisy, each one angrier than the last. After class, I walked out into the hallway and someone called my name. I turned around and saw Gray from campus security walking toward me. He was older, maybe in his 40s, with gray hair and a kind face. Gray said he'd heard about what happened to me and wanted to make sure I felt safe on campus. He asked if anyone had bothered me or made me feel threatened. I told him about the whispers and the video, but said no one had actually done anything. Gray gave me his card and said to call him immediately if anyone gave me trouble. He meant well, but having campus security personally checking on me just made me feel more exposed. Everyone walking past us in the hallway was staring. I thanked him and shoved his card in my pocket and walked away as fast as I could without running. My phone would not stop buzzing. Every few seconds, another notification. I pulled it out and saw messages from people I barely knew. Some were supportive, saying they believed me and knew it was all a misunderstanding. But most were asking invasive questions about the arrest. People wanted to know what it felt like to be zip-tied. They asked if I really made the Sims character of Bastion or if that was made up. Someone asked if I'd ever actually hurt anyone in real life. Another person wanted to know if I had a lawyer. The questions kept coming and coming, and I couldn't keep up with responding. Finally, I just turned my phone completely off and shoved it to the bottom of my backpack. The silence was immediate, and it felt like I could breathe again. That evening, Dad said we needed to go get my computer and phone back from evidence. We drove to the police station in silence. Dad kept his hands tight on the steering wheel and didn't try to make conversation. At the station, we had to wait at a desk while someone processed the return. The detective who handled it was different from the lead detective who'd been at my house. This one was younger, with blonde hair pulled back tight. She looked at me with obvious disgust while she checked my ID and had me sign forms. She made comments under her breath about how lucky I was. The way she slid my computer and phone across the counter felt aggressive, like she was mad they had to give my stuff back. Dad thanked her and she didn't respond. We carried everything out to the car and I held the evidence bags in my lap on the drive home. I set up my computer in my room that still had a broken door from the battering ram. When I booted it up, the Sims loaded automatically because it had been running when they took it. My neighborhood was still open. Bastion's character was still floating face down in the pool where I'd removed the ladder. The cheerful Sims music played like nothing was wrong. I stared at the dead Sim for a long time. My stomach felt sick looking at it now after everything that happened. I opened the menu and found the option to delete the entire save file. The game asked if I was sure because this action couldn't be undone. I clicked yes and watched all those hours of gameplay disappear. Every death scenario, every torture chamber, every screenshot I'd sent to Daisy. All of it gone in 2 seconds. My phone rang and Daisy's name showed up on the screen. I answered and she started talking immediately without saying hello. She told me Bastion had reached out to her wanting to apologize for cheating. He wanted to explain what he was going through and why he did what he did. Daisy's voice sounded confused and hurt at the same time. She said she didn't know if she wanted to talk to him or not. Part of her wanted answers, but part of her was still so angry about everything. She asked me what I thought she should do. I told Daisy she should probably hear him out because he was clearly dealing with serious stuff. Getting kicked out by your parents for being gay was huge and traumatic. But I also said I understood why she was still hurt. The cheating had been real even if he was struggling with his identity. Daisy was quiet for a minute, then said she felt manipulated by their whole relationship now. She said it felt like he'd been performing being straight with her, and she was just a prop in his closet. I didn't know what to say to that because she wasn't wrong. Bastion had used her even if he hadn't meant to hurt her. We stayed on the phone for a while longer just talking about how complicated everything was. Nothing felt simple anymore. 2 days after hanging up with Daisy, Mom knocked on my door around breakfast time. She sat on my bed and asked if I'd thought about seeing someone to talk about everything. I said I was fine and didn't need a therapist. She looked at me with this sad expression and pointed out that I'd woken up screaming 3 times that week. The nightmares were getting worse, not better, and she was worried about me. I turned away from her and stared at my computer screen. She kept talking about how normal it was to need help after trauma. I finally agreed just to get her to stop hovering. She made an appointment for Thursday afternoon with someone named Dr. Locke, who specialized in trauma. The therapy office was in a boring medical building near campus. I sat in the waiting room filling out forms about my mental health history. When Dr. Locke called my name, I followed her into a small room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on the side table. She asked me to describe what brought me in today. I started explaining about the Sims and the misunderstanding, and suddenly I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. The words came pouring out about the battering ram and the zip ties and my mom screaming downstairs. Dr. Locke handed me tissues and let me cry for what felt like forever. When I finally stopped, she explained I was showing clear signs of acute stress disorder. She said my sense of safety had been violated in my own home and my brain was trying to process that trauma. The nightmares and panic were my body's way of trying to make sense of something that felt senseless. I checked my phone after the session and saw that Bastion's roommate had posted something that was blowing up online. Colt Macias wrote this long statement about how Bastion had been struggling with his sexuality for years. He explained that Bastion's parents were super religious and had kicked him out when they found gay dating apps on his phone. The post had thousands of comments already. Some people were being supportive and saying how brave Bastion was. Others were angry that he'd caused so much drama instead of just coming out sooner. Someone commented that his closet issues didn't excuse making everyone think he'd been kidnapped. Another person said his parents were monsters and deserved to be exposed publicly. The next morning, I got called to the dean's office during my biology lecture. My professor handed me a note and everyone stared as I packed up my stuff. The dean's secretary walked me straight into his office where he was sitting behind a huge wooden desk. He pulled out a folder and explained that several students had filed formal complaints about feeling unsafe around me. He showed me the police report that cleared me of any wrongdoing. Then he said that perception mattered as much as facts on a college campus. He asked me to keep a low profile for the rest of the semester. I nodded and left his office feeling sick to my stomach. Keeping a low profile turned out to be impossible when people recognized me from the viral video someone had posted. I walked out to the parking lot after my afternoon class and found my car covered in spray paint. The word psycho was written across the driver's side door in bright red letters. Campus security came to take photos and file a report. The officer told me they'd review camera footage, but the lot had blind spots. I sat in my car staring at the paint and trying not to cry. Security said I could file for reimbursement through the university, but it would take weeks to process. My phone buzzed with a text from Daisy while I was still sitting in the parking lot. She said she'd met Bastian at a coffee shop downtown that morning. He'd apologized for everything and tried to explain why he cheated on her. She wrote that he'd been trying to prove to himself he was straight by dating her. Being with her made him feel worse about himself instead of better. He thought if he could just force himself to be attracted to girls, then his parents wouldn't hate him. Daisy said he cried the whole time and seemed genuinely sorry about hurting her. I texted back asking if she forgave him. She called me instead of texting a response. Her voice sounded tired and confused. She said forgiveness felt really complicated right now. Part of her was angry that he'd hurt her while dealing with his own stuff. She felt like she'd been a prop in his closet instead of a real girlfriend. But another part of her felt bad for being connected to his suffering. She said she understood why he did it, but understanding didn't make the pain go away. I told her she didn't have to decide anything right now. She could take time to figure out how she felt without pressure. That evening, I heard my parents arguing in the kitchen. I stood at the top of the stairs listening to them go back and forth. Dad kept saying he felt terrible about not mentioning he'd seen Bastian at the shelter sooner. Mom's voice was sharp when she replied that it wasn't his fault. But her tone suggested she was still processing her own anger about the timing. Dad said if he'd just thought to mention it casually, then none of this would have happened. Mom told him to stop torturing himself over something he couldn't change. Their voices got louder, and I went back to my room and shut the door. The next week, my parents met with a lawyer to discuss taking legal action against the police department. They came home looking defeated and sat me down in the living room. The lawyer had explained that the text messages gave police probable cause to investigate. Even though the raid was traumatic and ultimately wrong, they'd followed proper procedure based on the evidence they had. The lawyer said we could try to sue, but it would be expensive and we'd probably lose. Dad asked about the emotional damage and the broken door. The lawyer said that wasn't enough for a civil rights violation case. Mom cried quietly while Dad held her hand. 3 weeks after the raid, I was walking down the hallway in my dorm when someone slammed a door. The sound hit me like a physical force and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My vision went dark around the edges and my legs gave out. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor with my head between my knees. My heart was pounding, so hard I thought it might explode. Sweat dripped down my back and my hands shook uncontrollably. Someone asked if I was okay, but their voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I sat there for over an hour waiting for my body to calm down. When I could finally stand up, my legs felt like jelly and I had to hold onto the wall to make it back to my room. Maya started showing up outside my classes every few days. She'd walk with me across campus asking how I was doing and if I'd eaten lunch yet. The third time she caught me, I could tell she was building up to something. She mentioned a support group for students dealing with trauma that met Tuesday nights in the counseling center. I told her I was fine and didn't need to sit in a circle talking about my feelings with strangers. She said to think about it and handed me a flyer anyway. I shoved it in my backpack and forgot about it on purpose. The idea of being the girl who got arrested in a support group made my skin crawl. I didn't want people knowing my story or looking at me with pity. Maya kept checking in, though. She'd text me random supportive messages and leave notes in my campus mailbox. It was nice, but also kind of annoying because it reminded me I was someone who needed checking on. That Friday morning, I was scrolling through my phone in the dining hall when Bastian's post appeared. The statement was long and detailed. He wrote about his parents finding messages on his phone and kicking him out the same night. He described staying at the shelter and ignoring everyone because he was ashamed. He apologized to Daisy for using her to hide his sexuality. He apologized to me for the chaos his disappearance caused and explained that he had no idea police would connect his missing person report to someone's video game texts. He talked about being gay and scared and alone. The comment section was a mess. Some people wrote supportive things about coming out and dealing with bad parents. Others said he was selfish for disappearing without telling anyone. A bunch of people argued about whether he owed Daisy an apology or if his situation excused the cheating. Someone wrote that at least now I looked less crazy. Another person said the whole thing was still weird regardless of the circumstances. My phone buzzed with notifications as people started tagging me in posts. Some users were defending me and explaining the Sims context to people who still thought I was creepy. They posted screenshots showing how the game actually worked and why the texts made sense. But plenty of others were still calling me weird for making a character just to torture it. One comment said that even if it was just a game, spending hours planning virtual deaths of a real person showed something was wrong with me. Another said the hearts around my doodles proved I enjoyed it too much. I closed the app and shoved my phone in my pocket. My appetite disappeared even though I'd barely touched my breakfast. The vindication felt hollow because people were still judging me for something that had seemed harmless at the time. Daisy texted me that afternoon asking if I'd seen Bastian's post. I said yes and asked what she thought about it. She called instead of texting back. Her voice sounded strained when she said we needed to talk about everything. We met at the library study rooms an hour later. She sat across from me and immediately said I was making Bastian's coming out about my own trauma. I stared at her in disbelief. She said I was acting like I was the only victim in this situation when Bastian had been kicked out by his parents and was actually homeless. I felt my face get hot. I told her she was the one who pushed the whole Sims revenge thing in the first place. She wanted me to make him suffer and sent me dozens of messages begging for more death scenarios. She looked shocked that I brought it up. I said she encouraged every single thing I did, and now she was acting like I was some psycho who did it all on my own. She stood up and said I was being unfair. I stood up too and said she didn't understand how violated and scared I still felt. She grabbed her bag and left without saying anything else. We didn't talk for 4 days. I kept checking my phone hoping she'd text first, but she never did. It was the longest we'd gone without talking since we became friends in middle school. I missed her so much it made my chest ache. But I was also furious that she didn't seem to get how traumatized I was. Every time I thought about texting her, I remembered her accusing me of making everything about myself. My anger would flare up again and I'd put my phone down. I saw her across campus twice and we both pretended not to notice each other. The second time I went back to my dorm and cried for 20 minutes. I hated fighting with her. But I also hated that she was focusing on Bastion's problems instead of acknowledging what happened to me. My therapy session that week helped me understand things differently. The therapist said everyone processes trauma in their own way. She explained that Daisy might be dealing with guilt by focusing on Bastion's situation instead of facing her role in what happened to me. People sometimes redirect their feelings toward easier targets when the real source of guilt is too painful to address. She said Daisy probably felt responsible for my arrest because she pushed the Sims idea so hard. Focusing on Bastion's coming out was simpler than admitting she'd contributed to my trauma. The explanation made sense, but I still felt hurt and abandoned. The therapist said I should try talking to Daisy about it when I was ready. She reminded me that good friendships could survive hard conversations if both people were willing to be honest. I texted Daisy that night. I wrote that I was sorry for snapping at her and that I missed her. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Daisy was already crying when I answered. We talked for 2 hours about everything. She said she'd been terrified watching the situation unfold and felt responsible for putting me in danger. I told her the police misunderstanding gaming culture wasn't her fault, but I understood why she felt guilty. She admitted she'd been avoiding thinking about her role because the guilt was eating her alive. I said I was sorry for not recognizing how much she was struggling too. We both cried and apologized and said we never wanted to fight like that again. By the end of the call, we were laughing through tears about how messed up the whole situation was. She said we should meet with Bastion together so everyone could apologize and move forward. It felt weird and awkward, but also necessary. We all needed closure from this bizarre nightmare. We set up the meeting for Saturday afternoon at a park near campus. Daisy and I arrived together and found Bastion sitting on a bench near the fountain. He looked healthier than he had at the shelter. His face had more color and he'd gained some weight. He stood up when he saw us coming and his hands were shaking. He said he was staying with his aunt now in a spare bedroom. She was supportive and helping him figure out his next steps. He looked at me and said he was genuinely sorry about the chaos his disappearance caused. He never imagined police would connect his missing person report to my text messages about a video game. He felt terrible about what I went through and offered to make more public statements clearing my name if it would help. I told him a statement would help, but nothing would erase the trauma of being zip-tied in my own bedroom. He started crying and apologized again. I watched his shoulders shake and realized he was carrying his own guilt about all of this. He kept saying he never thought about how his disappearance would affect anyone else. He was so focused on his own pain that he didn't consider the ripple effects. I told him I understood, but it didn't change what happened to me. The zip ties cutting into my wrists, the SWAT boots on my bedroom floor, my parents watching me get treated like a criminal. He nodded and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He pulled out his phone and asked if I wanted him to write the statement right now. I said yes, but to take his time and make sure it explained everything clearly. He typed for a few minutes while I sat there picking at the peeling paint on the bench. Daisy moved closer to him and read over his shoulder, suggesting changes to make certain parts clearer. They worked on it together for maybe 20 minutes. When they finished, Bastion showed me the draft. It explained the Sims in detail, included screenshots of the game, described his situation with his parents, and made it crystal clear that I had nothing to do with his disappearance. He apologized for the misunderstanding and took full responsibility for not telling anyone where he was going. I told him it looked good, and he should post it. Daisy touched his arm and asked if they could talk privately for a minute. I moved to a different bench about 30 feet away, close enough to see them but too far to hear anything. They sat facing each other on the bench. Bastion was doing most of the talking at first, his hands moving while he explained something. Daisy listened with her arms crossed, then uncrossed them. She started talking, and I could see her getting emotional, wiping her eyes a few times. Bastion reached out and she let him take her hand. They talked for maybe 15 minutes. At the end, she hugged him tight and held on for a long time. When they pulled apart, her face looked different, lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. They walked back over to me together, and Bastion said he was going to post the statement now. He hit share, and we all watched his phone as the post went live on his social media accounts. The response started immediately. Within 5 minutes, his post had dozens of comments and shares. Some people apologized to me directly in the comments, tagging my account and saying they were sorry for jumping to conclusions. Others deleted their previous posts calling me crazy or dangerous, but plenty of people doubled down. They said the whole thing was still weird, that that making a Sims character to torture was creepy regardless of the context. Someone commented that I probably helped Bastion fake his disappearance to cover up what I did. Another person said the statement proved nothing, that we were all just trying to control the narrative. I stopped reading after a few minutes because my hands were shaking. Daisy took my phone and turned off notifications. She said I needed to stop checking social media for a while and just focus on healing. Bastion apologized again for not being able to control what people thought. I told him it wasn't his fault that some people were determined to believe the worst. We said goodbye at the park, and I went home feeling exhausted. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner when I got there. She asked how the meeting went, and I told her it was good, but also really hard. She hugged me and said she was proud of me for facing it. Then she mentioned that she and Dad had scheduled their first therapy appointment together for next week. I asked why they needed therapy, and she said the raid traumatized them too. Dad's guilt about not mentioning seeing Bastion sooner had been eating at him for weeks. He kept saying he could have prevented everything if he'd just thought to bring it up. Mom admitted she was having nightmares about the SWAT team breaking down our door. She'd wake up in the middle of the night hearing the battering ram in her head. I felt terrible that I hadn't even thought about how all of this affected them. I'd been so focused on my own trauma that I didn't consider they were suffering too. Gray from campus security called me 2 days later. He said they'd reviewed footage from the parking lot cameras and found the person who spray painted my car. It was a junior named Trevor who lived in the dorm next to mine. Campus security had disciplined him, and the university was requiring him to pay for the damage. Gray said Trevor claimed he was just trying to warn other students about me, that he thought he was doing the right thing. I asked if Trevor got expelled, and Gray said no, just probation and mandatory community service. It felt like a small victory, but also frustrating that he got away with basically just a slap on the wrist. I thanked Gray for following up and told him I appreciated the security office taking it seriously. The next day, Maya called me into her office. She said she wanted to help me file a formal complaint about the students who made me feel unsafe on campus without any evidence. We spent an hour writing up everything that happened after the video went viral. The whispers in class, people avoiding me in the dining hall, the spray paint, the anonymous messages I'd received. Maya submitted the complaint to the dean's office with a request that the university address the situation campus-wide. 3 days later, the dean sent an email to all students about due process and not jumping to conclusions. It talked about how social media can spread misinformation and reminded everyone that accusations aren't the same as guilt. The email didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew what it was about. Some students rolled their eyes at the email, calling it performative. But a few people reached out to apologize for how they'd treated me. It wasn't much, but it felt like something. Maya had been recommending a trauma support group for weeks, and I finally agreed to try it. The group met Thursday evenings in a building off campus. When I walked in for the first time, there were about 8 people sitting in a circle. The counselor running the group introduced me and asked if I wanted to share why I was there. I gave a brief version of what happened, and everyone nodded like they understood. Over the next few weeks, I heard their stories. A guy whose apartment had been broken into while he slept. A girl who'd been in a car accident. Someone else who'd witnessed violence. Hearing other people talk about their trauma made me feel less alone. I realized I wasn't the only one who jumped at loud noises or had trouble sleeping. When I shared my experience, people actually listened and didn't judge me. They understood that trauma doesn't make sense to people who haven't experienced it. The group helped me process the fear and anger I'd been carrying around. I started sleeping better and having fewer panic attacks. Daisy and I were texting more regularly again, but it felt different now. We were more careful with each other, more honest about our feelings. She'd text to check how I was doing and actually wait for a real answer instead of just accepting a quick response. I did the same for her. We talked about what happened with Bastion and how we both felt guilty in different ways. She admitted she'd been using humor to avoid dealing with her pain after the breakup. I said I'd gone along with it because I wanted to help her feel better, but we both should have found healthier ways to cope. We set some new boundaries about not encouraging each other's worst impulses. If one of us was spiraling, the other would say something instead of just going along with it. We were rebuilding our friendship on a foundation of actual communication, instead of just shared jokes and avoiding serious emotions. It felt more real this way, more solid, like we were finally being honest about who we were instead of just performing friendship. 4 months passed, and I woke up one Tuesday morning without that instant panic in my chest. I'd slept through the whole night for the first time since the raid. No nightmares about zip ties or SWAT boots crashing through my door. My therapist smiled when I told her during our session that afternoon. She said I'd made real progress in dealing with the trauma, though she warned me I'd probably always jump at certain sounds or feel nervous around police. I could live with that. The important thing was, I could finally sleep again without seeing officers tearing through my room every time I closed my eyes. Bastion texted me and Daisy in a group chat a week later with good news. He'd been accepted into some support program for LGBTQ youth who were dealing with housing problems. The program would help him find stable housing and connect him with resources while he figured out his next steps. He sent updates every few weeks about job interviews or therapy sessions or small victories like finding an apartment he could actually afford. Daisy and I both appreciated knowing he was doing better, that something good came out of all the chaos. It felt weird to care about her ex after everything, but trauma has a way of connecting people in strange ways. My parents sat me down one Saturday morning for what they called a serious talk. I braced myself for another lecture, but instead they wanted to understand. Mom had watched YouTube videos about The Sims, and Dad had read articles about gaming culture and dark humor among younger people. They admitted the text had looked scary without knowing what The Sims actually was, that they could see now why I thought the jokes were harmless. I tried to explain why my generation uses dark humor differently, how we process stress through memes and jokes that probably seem disturbing to older people. We talked for almost 3 hours. Really talked instead of them lecturing and me defending. It didn't fix everything, but it helped. They got why I wasn't some psycho, and I understood why they'd been so terrified that morning. I'm doing okay now. Actually okay, instead of just saying it to make people stop asking. The terror of that morning will never completely leave me. I still flinch when someone knocks too loud, or when I hear sirens nearby. But I can function again. Go to class without panic attacks. Sleep in my own room without nightmares every single night. I still play The Sims because I'm not going to let fear take away something I enjoy. But I'm way more careful now about how I talk about it in messages. I don't make jokes about killing Sims or trapping them in rooms, even though millions of players do the exact same things. Context matters more than I ever realized before all this happened. One wrong screenshot or text taken out of context can destroy your whole life in hours. Daisy and I are stronger friends now than we were before. We survived something impossible together and came out the other side still talking, still trusting each other. We're more honest now, more willing to call each other out instead of just going along with bad ideas. I'm proud of how we all handled this, me and Daisy and even Bastion and my parents. Nobody was perfect, but we all tried our best to deal with an impossible situation with some kind of grace.